Hi everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about the Family and Medical Leave Act of 1993 and how that may affect you as a future manager one day. So I'm just going to go over the history of the act, what the act exactly is, and what situations it's used for, and I'm going to go over the responsibility of the employee and the employer. So just an overview of the act, the Family Medical Leave Act of 1993 is also referred to FMLA, and you'll see that throughout my presentation. It entitles eligible employees of covered employers to take an unpaid leave for specific family and medical reasons. The thought behind this is to help families be able to balance work and their family life. It was said that workers should not have to choose between the job they need and the family members they love who need their care. According to the Department of Labor, adopting flexible practices in the workplace potentially boosts productivity, improves morale, and benefits the economy. So the big thing with this act is that when an employee does take a leave, their health benefits must be maintained while they're on their leave. Their job must be secure and ready for when their leave is over, and the employee cannot be faulted for taking the leave. So meaning that when they come back to work, they should not be able to face any consequences for taking a leave. So a little bit of history for the need for an employee leave legislation. This has kind of been a long time coming. The United States has historically lagged behind most of the developed countries with regard to family leave benefits. In many countries, a family leave policy includes a wage replacement. Some countries in Europe even grant a full year of paid maternity leave. Excuse me. So, what kind of started the Family Medical Leave Act was the Family Employment Security Act in 1984. So this kind of this was calling for 26 weeks per year of unpaid job protected leave to care for a new child, a child illness, a spouse's disability, or the employee's own disability. That was never really formally introduced to Congress. And then the following year, we had the Parental and Disability Act, which was very similar to the same thing. This stalled in the House. Republicans really put pressure on revisions. And then the American Association of Retired Persons kind of stepped in and was like, hey, you really should add taking care for a spouse and an elderly parent for that. So then the next year, with all those revisions taken into consideration, the Family and Medical Leave Act was created. It was debated for the next few years, and it would finally pass in 1990 in both the House and then in the Senate. And then about a month later, it was brought to the president's desk. The president was George H. Bush at this time, and he vetoed it. He believed that only businesses should be allowed to provide it if it's voluntary, and he believed it overall would hurt the economy. So 2 years later, the whole process repeated again. More revisions were made. It was passed again. It was brought to the president's desk again, and it was vetoed. So then we get to 1993. President Bill Clinton took office, and the Family Medical Leave Act was one of the first major pieces of legislation he signed into office. 2008 and 2009, we see the first amendments to it, adding some extended leave and coverage for workers who have family members in the military. And then again, we see another amendment in 2015 that allows leave for a spouse in a same-sex marriage. And today we don't really see this too much. Some states are starting to get their own policies on family and medical leave, but we don't really see it too much in Congress right now. So what reasons fall under the Family and Medical Leave Act? So to start with, the birth and placement of a child. So when I say placement, I'm including adoption and foster care, and those are included within the act. Both parents are entitled to take this act at the same time, and the act can start before a child arrives. Next would be the care for a spouse, child, or parent who has a serious health condition. Now, the Family Medical Leave Act is a little bit stringent, where you can only take off work to care for an immediate family member. And they define that as a spouse, child, or parent. And you can only take off time to help a child that's 18 years or younger, unless they're 18 years and older and have a mental or physical disability that prevents them from helping take care of themselves. And a parent is not defined as a parent-in-law, but it does include step, adoptive, or a foster parent. So this is kind of where we see kind of a gap. It does not really reflect the needs of many families nowadays, especially with a lot of blended families. Next would be a serious health condition that makes the employee unable to perform essential functions to the job. And lastly, like I had mentioned before about the military, a spouse, child, or parent is of a military member on covered active duty or called to cover active duty is encompassed in this act. And for this part of the act, the child does not have to be under the age of 18, obviously. Who does this act apply to? So the two big things to get benefits from the Family Medical Leave Act is that you have to work for a covered employer and you have to be an eligible employee. So just because you work for a covered employer does not necessarily mean you're an eligible employee. So a covered employer is a private sector employer with 50 or more employees and 20 or more work weeks in the current or preceding calendar years, or a public agency, so like a local, state, or federal government agency, and the number of employees that work there does not matter with this, or a public or private elementary school or a secondary school, and again, it does not matter the number of employees that works there. An eligible employee must work for a covered employee for at least 12 months minimum. And within those 12 months, they must work for 1,250 hours of service. And it's also required that they work in a location where the employer has at least 50 employees within 75 miles. There is a little bit of an exception that you may hear of that affects airline flight crew employees, but just if you would hear of that. But overall, about 40% of the workforce is not covered by the Family and Medical Leave Act because they work for smaller employers, or they do not work enough hours, or they have not worked for their employer long enough when they would need benefits. And some people are eligible employees don't take the leave that if they need it, they don't take it because they can't afford it at the end of the day. So leave entitlement. So if an eligible employee needs to take a leave, what do they get? So they're entitled to 12 work weeks of unpaid leave within a 12-month period. Now, this 12 work week can be broken up. They don't have to take 12 work weeks. They can just take what they need. Eligible employees are entitled to 26 work weeks of unpaid leave during a single 12-month period to care for a covered service member. This also includes veterans with a serious injury or illness. Employees can take an intermittent or reduced schedule based on the situation. So usually this is with an employer's permission. So it really is just going to depend on your facility or company. And employees may be able to concurrently receive accrued pay leave to cover some or all of the leave period. So an employee or an employer may want this instead or may ask for this instead. So how to start getting this leave and to go on to this leave. So it's going to start with the employee. The employee must give notice, and to give notice, they must comply with their employer's usual and customary requirements for requesting leave. So if it's like in a certain system or there's a certain way to do it, they must follow that. And they must provide enough information to their employer to reasonably determine whether the Family Medical Leave Act may apply to this leave request, and they can't lie about anything. And usually they must, their employees are expected to give about 30 days in advance, like a notice in advance, if the reason is foreseeable. So an example of this would be if an employee knew that she was pregnant and she was having a baby in a couple months and was able to give notice about that. But this does not count if like an injury or illness from an employee or a family member came on really fast. That's not expected. So as an employer, there are responsibilities as well. It is required that a notice explaining the rights and responsibilities under the Act is posted. And there must be information about the Act in the employee handbook or just kind of any information you get as a newly hired employee. And employers must provide the employee with notice concerning their eligibility and rights for the Act leave when requested by the employee, and they must notify employees whether they fall under the Family Medical Leave Act and what they're entitled to. So here is that notice, I said that it had to be posted. Employees must post this somewhere in their building. It's kind of like a long infographic, so it's kind of hard to see right now, but I did post a link in the bottom corner. If you're interested in reading it and looking it up, you can just copy that link, but this is what it looks like. So if somebody is leaving for a medical reason, whether it's themselves or a family member, the employer may require certification and support that they leave from a healthcare provider. So they just need proof. So the employer must notify the employee that they want proof, and then the employee must give them proof within 15 days, and then the employer must notify the employee in writing if leave is permitted. So the employer has a little bit of options with this situation. They can identify any like discrepancies they notice and ask the employer or the employee to fix it within a week. They can contact the healthcare provider directly, and they can even require a second and even a third medical opinion, but that's at the employer's expense though. So here I have a case study. You are the food service director for 19 employees at a local elementary school. John, one of your full-time cafeteria workers, has a sick mother. He has been working for you for the past 10 months. He comes to you to inform you he wishes to take some time off and asks if he falls under the Family and Medical Leave Act guidelines. He expresses his interest in getting time off in 3 weeks because that's when his mother is undergoing surgery. Is John eligible for the Family and Medical Leave Act? So if you want to think about it, you can go ahead and pause right here, but I'm just going to go on and explain it right now. So overall, no, John would not be able to be eligible for the act because he has only worked there 10 months. The act requires him working there for over 12 months. Now, there is also a rule that, you need 50 or more employees, but that guideline does not apply here since it's an elementary school. So as a manager, you could try to map out a game plan. So once it gets to the 12 months and, monitor his hours to make sure he has enough hours, you can talk about his vacation leave and any time off he has accrued. But overall, no, he would not be eligible for the benefits. So my big question was, how does this affect the organization? I found some data that is from January of 2020, so kind of right before the pandemic. So and since the pandemic kind of had a hard effect on the workforce, this information doesn't affect that. Most employers report a neutral or positive effect when employees take family medical leave, just because it kind of boosts morale and productivity when they get back. 54% of work sites report no noticeable effects from complying, and 30% experience a positive effect from complying. And how work is managed in that employee's absence is most managers, temporarily assign work to another employee, or they break up work, they delegate. 3% of work sites hire a temporary replacement for that time period. There is little evidence that employees misuse leaves. Less than 2% of work sites report any misuse of family medical leave. But if you are ever getting that situation and you suspect an employee is lying, you can go on the Department of Labor website, and it kind of tells you how to go about that. The resources as a manager. So what you need to know as a manager is that if an employee comes to you and wishes to know more about the Family Medical Leave Act, or that they think that they might, be qualified for it, your go-to is going to be the HR department or an HR worker there. The employer guide to the Family Medical Leave Act is also a great resource. I have the link there. It really has everything that you would need to know about it. And I also just want to point out Section 105 and Section 825 of the Act. So these are the only parts of the Act that can come back on the employer or the manager if you interfere or deny or discriminate against the individual for going on the Act, or going on leave, excuse me. So you definitely want to make sure as a manager that you're seeing every employee through and you're getting in contact with the HR department. And because of COVID is going on, I just wanted to lightly touch upon that real quick. Eligible employees can take leave for specific family and medical reasons, including complications that arise that create a serious health condition. So that means complications caused by COVID. So that, yes, if a family or an employee is experiencing complications to COVID, they could apply and fall under the Family Medical Leave Act. However, leave taken by an employee for the purpose of avoiding exposure to COVID-19 would not fall under the act. However, you might have a company policy or a facility specific policy that might, help avoiding exposure by taking time off. But under the Family Medical Leave Act, it does not do anything for that. Okay, well, that is my slideshow, and thank you so much for listening.